Why? Inside Edition, straight ahead.
They were high school sweethearts, very much in love. But things turned sour, and she made a deadly decision.
She killed my son in cold blood and stabbed him 22 times to make sure he was dead.
Now, this town's sadness has turned to anger. Incredibly, this 15-year-old killer is not going to jail.
Just one question. You gotta go live.
They've got everything money can buy. The rich, but not yet famous of glitzy Palm Beach. Now...
Hello, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching Inside Edition today. The latest fad among the rich and bored is trying to buy prestige, trying to buy royalty. Dukes, dames, and barons, popular high school student. He seemed to have everything going for him, but then a relationship with a girlfriend got out of control and the girl killed him. But as Les Trent reports, there are more shocks to come.
David Eccleston, the popular honor roll student, a star on the basketball team. April Del Olio, his young, pretty girlfriend. They were high school sweethearts in the tiny village of New Berlin in central New York State.
He gave her his class ring and just went steady, like normal teenagers do.
If they were like most kids their age, they'd grow up, grow apart, but always remember each other. You never forget your first love. But David and April were different. Their love story ended on a cold October morning last year, when behind this Quonset hut, April attacked David with an 8-inch steak knife.
He had 21 stab wounds to the back, which extended from the upper shoulder down into the upper thigh area of him. The one that caused the death of David was one to the heart.
David had just accepted a basketball and academic scholarship from Alfred State University. New Berlin lost one of its shining stars. Grief counselors helped the students of New Berlin High School cope with the tragedy. And a 14-year-old girl was arrested for one of the most brutal crimes ever to be committed here. April Del Olio was ordered to stand trial as an adult for the murder of her boyfriend, David Eccleston. To the disbelief of most people in New Berlin, April pled innocent by reason of temporary insanity. The defense would argue that April killed her first love in a jealous rage, sparked by both his threat to end the relationship and his infidelities.
Dave was no different from any other 17-year-old boy. He was good-looking. Yeah, girls found him attractive. I'm sure he found other girls attractive. That doesn't make him a bad guy.
Not in most people's eyes, but to April it did. David's attraction to other girls and April's dependency on their intense sexual relationship that began when she was only 12 would be the cornerstone of her defense.
This was a very unusual case. You had a 15-year-old girl with a 68 IQ who was 14 at the time of the incident, who was in an abusive relationship with someone for 2.5 years. The doctors came in here, they all agreed that it has a very adverse effect on your ability to, and your judgment if you get in that type of relationship at 12 years old.
David's mother, Diane, surrounds herself with memories of her talented son. She rejects the claim that David abused April, but is consumed by what she sees as the audacity of April's defense.
I knew the girl for 2 years. She was not insane. She planned it, she premeditated it, she carried through with it, and she covered herself with an alibi. She killed my son in cold blood and stabbed him 22 times to make sure he was dead.
The murder trial of April Del Olio and the expected guilty verdict was to help in the healing process for the village of New Berlin, but that was not the case. As part of its defense that April was driven to kill, her attorney spent much of the trial talking about David's sexual exploits.
Let me tell you, the history of the relationship was on again, off again, okay? He'd always cheat on her and she'd always come back to him. The week before the incident happened, she found out about 7 new infidelities. She found him in another girl's bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That other girl is Katie Pylinski. She says she and David were only talking in her bedroom when April burst in uninvited in a jealous rage. Katie says he was pouring his heart out over April's flirtations at a party that night.
He said that she was all over this guy named Tim, that she had been drinking and she was all over him, and he couldn't stand it, so he got up and left.
To David's friends and family, the infidelities were a reciprocal affair. David and April's relationship was no different than that of many other teenage couples. David no more the sinner than April.
She did the same. She wrote him a lot of love letters. In some of those letters, she specifically stated who she was with and what she did with him, and so the relationship went both ways.
But Katie Pylinski says April was extremely possessive of David, and on that night April found them in Katie's bedroom. She says April threatened her.
But she told me that if she found out me and Dave were having sex, that she would kill us both.
This wasn't your typical high school girlfriend-boyfriend relationship. This was intense. This was obsessive by both people.
And defense lawyer Joseph McBride, with expert testimony by psychiatrist Ivan Frost, tried to convince the jury that the threat of losing David was too much for April, leading to her spontaneous, violent outburst. Last week, to the astonishment of everyone in the courtroom, the jury agreed, finding April guilty of manslaughter, but not responsible for her actions because of mental defect. She will not go to prison. A strange form of justice in the minds of New Berliners.
And I don't believe this about her being insane either. You read all the stories that was in the newspapers and kept up on all the stories that was on the news. This is that she had planned it ahead of time. That's not insane.
When this trial went on, a lot of terrible things came out on the stand, and it wasn't reported accurately in the newspapers because no one wants to trash David. This kid was built up here as a saint, as a local hero. The problem with that is that when you get an acquittal, after 2 weeks of that false reporting, the community's up in arms.
David Eccleston is buried no more than 100 yards from the baseball diamonds at New Berlin High School, where he loved to play. His mother says she chose the plot so that he could be among the graduating class of '93, at least in spirit, when they picked up their diplomas.
I didn't see him turn 18. I'm never going to see him graduate next month. Or go to college. And then having to deal with the verdict where nobody is responsible for my son's death.
Terrible waste. And because of death threats, April and her family have now moved out of New Berlin. Coming next, rich people paying big money to become royalty.